Camera's rolling. Camera set and action.
Good morning, Dr. Enrico Melson.
Good morning.
Wonderful to see you again. On behalf of your audience on YouTube, a warm welcome.
Thank you.
Here today to be a part of the lectures of the 7 pillars of integral education, meta-systems. Today you will be providing for us here the 7th pillar, the education for service. Thank you, Dr. Enrico Melson.
Thank you. Service is what this world needs. Enlightened service, especially. Creative genius applied to service. Service by every global citizen. Service that serves the needs of a developing society. The service that accelerates the character development of an individual. The service that empowers the very servant himself, as well as those who receive such service. And the knowing that service is indeed a dimension of being, that how can we experience ourselves as whole beings if we are not engaged in the process of service, a positive, proactive and promotive, projectional engagement with others, to know that we are in service to advancing our society, our ecosystem. So education for service actually then recapitulates all of the previous 6 pillars as I have just sojourned with you down that particular path. What we see here in teaching service is that we must teach the high value of service and a service-oriented consciousness. What some notable thinkers have espoused in the world of social psychology are values hierarchies. And one of those, which is a triadic, 3-tier value system, speaks of level 1 consciousness or level 1 values, which is all about me. Me and that which is therefore not me. That kind of self-centeredness lends itself very little to the providing of what we would call selfless service. Service on behalf of others. Service to assist others in improving and enhancing the quality of their lives. Even service that enhances the collective efforts, because so much of that level of consciousness is self-oriented. The second tier of those 3 levels is the tier of what's called us versus them. And yes, there is great desire that people who operate primarily at that second tier have a desire, have an inclination to reach out to others. But that primary inclination of reaching out is to others who they identify as like themselves within their group, whether it be a cultural group, a national group, an ethnic group, a gender group, a lifestyle group, a belief group. So yes, they tend to have service orientation, yet primarily service orientation favorable to the members and constituents of that particular defined group of which they are a member, or the multiple groups in which they identify themselves And quite often that service orientation has its counterpart, its shadow aspect, which is service to have adverse impact upon those who are not of their group. This is indeed what has underlined so much of that service which has led to colonization around the world. Great volunteer efforts have been expanded and extended to go into foreign lands and go into foreign cultures, and in the name of service, bring about the civilization of those indigenous savages, those foreigners who need to be brought to our way of thinking. That has also been a form of service historically. Yet again, it is service within that level 2 of us versus them. Again, level 1 being I versus all that is not I. So when we really are talking about here with service is level 3 in the education for service. We're talking about level 3 service. What is level 3? Level 3 is what is called universal caring, universal concern. Level 3 is that tier within which we begin to experience something called unconditionality. The unconditionality of love, of compassion, of kindness, of intimacy, of openness, the unconditionality of sharing, the unconditionality of, indeed, assisting, that we would learn and that we would welcome and embrace this kind of further development of our own being, so that we will know ourselves as servants, and that in fact knowing oneself as servant would be considered a very highly valued state of being. Historically, a servant is someone generally looked down upon. Other times, the use of the term servant, so self-applied, has been received as an indication of a false modesty. Oftentimes it has been taken as an expression of a mode of humiliation. And of course, when we talk about the term servitude itself, we know that that has been applied in a more punitive way, in a more belittling and denigrating, contractile way than it has been extolled as a virtue. We are talking about the virtuous nature of service. That indeed we are here to help one another. That indeed we are here to correct the errors of the past. That we are indeed here to accelerate the healings in ourselves as individuals and in our collective bodies. To do so, we must also learn how to know when we are being petty, when we are being altruistic, even when we are being global, and when we are being unconditional. We must have the discernment. So the education for service is also oriented around catalyzing that greater expansion of the capacity of discernment itself. Because lapses into victimhood, it lapses into justification, it lapses into self-indulgence, are all tendencies which run counter to giving selfless service. An example, someone has $1 million, writes a check, gives that $1 million to someone else. We can say this is a great act. Yet what is the intention of the person who gave the $1 million? if they are given that $1 million because they are coming from guilt, this is some form of assuaging their guilt. Or if they gave that $1 million because they felt that they must do so, or else they will be punished karmically or religiously in some kind of way. They gave the $1 million to avoid some other consequence. Perhaps they gave the $1 million because they were soliciting favors, even the simple favor of opinion, soliciting approval and approbation. Perhaps they gave the $1 million because they felt themselves superior to the others who would receive such monies. Can you see that any of those as reasons, as justifications for an act which would seem to be an act of beneficence, yet with such reasonings and motivations and justifications and second-tier agendas, vitiate the impact of such a gift, such an act, can actually distort the energy of such an act, contaminate it. Certainly, we would not call that act an act of selfless service. Perhaps if such conditionalities were laid in also accompanying that gift, that may not even be considered a form of service at all, perhaps, because it could be instead an instrument of exploitation. It could be the carrot that creates the addictive attachment of a people to others who would seek a far greater gain and return on their investment. And thus, how would we see that as service? So again, the education for service will explore ethics, will explore these kinds of tiers of concentric causal relationships of action and motivation, intention, will give the students who are in this environment of integral education a sense indeed that striving to be a selfless servant is an incredibly admirable state until it is no longer such, until it is simply commonplace and universal. That this state of service is a consciousness, a way of being, is a predominant dimensionality of cultures, and what is the true hallmark of global citizenship? Service. When we are propagating this service wave, we are also doing many other things. We are vitiating, we are ameliorating the pervasive foul influence of feeling unsafe in the presence of one another. The foul influence of mistrust is that which is cultivated in our various cultures, our various strata of society. That indeed the notion that we cannot heal, that we cannot continue to learn, that we cannot continue to evolve is itself a foul notion. It is in fact through this service that we will be able to heal, to unify, to advance, to evolve. So selfless service is far more than a simplistic act of deferential engagement with another. Service itself is a mechanism. It is a resonator for the experience of intimacy, for the experience of synergy, for the experience of unity and for the flow of creativity. And that indeed is what we're here for. So again, I hope that this is useful. This is the 7th pillar, education for service. Thank you.
Dr. Enrico Melson, thank you. Thank you for giving us the treasure and the gems of your heart that has allowed our souls to sing. The science that has filled our minds with elaborate visions as we have taken and we have received from you 7 pillars of integral education meta systems. Thank you, Dr. Enrico Melson.
Thank you.